Parks was arrested and taken down to jail, taken from the bus, just because she refused to give up her seat.
On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks was infamously arrested for breaking the segregation law. She refused to give up her seat on a Montgomery State bus to a white individual. We all know that she impacted history, but was she really the first one to go against segregation? Was she really the first one to break the racial barrier? Was she really the first one to stand up for what was right? On March 2nd, 1955, 9 months earlier, a young girl named Claudette Colvin took action. She was charged with assault and much more. Although she received no public recognition for changing history, her actions greatly impacted the civil rights movement. Later, this inspired people such as Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., and John F. Kennedy to help break the racial barrier, pass the Civil Rights Act in 1964, and give all citizens equal rights today. The oppression that African Americans experienced wasn't new at this time. However, fighting against it was. Dating back to slavery, segregation started during the 17th century, when rich white men started kidnapping Africans and forcing them to work for the American colonies. Although slavery was introduced long ago, it still affected Claudette due to the Jim Crow laws. These laws began in 1865. At the same time, the 13th Amendment was established. It freed millions of slaves. Within the 13th Amendment, laws determined where, when, and how the discharged slaves could work. As mentioned at History.com, the codes appeared throughout the South as a legal way to put black citizens into indentured servitude, to take voting rights away, to control where they lived and how they traveled, and to seize children for labor purposes. Later, the southern cities began to grow with more African Americans. White people demanded stricter laws so there would be fewer privileges for people of color. This led to having entertainment areas, restaurants, and parks that prohibited African Americans from entering. During this time, Claudette explained the situations they were in.
There was segregation everywhere. Churches, buses, and schools, they were all segregated, and you couldn't even go into the same restaurant. I remember Easter one year, and I was allowed to get a pair of panther leather shoes, which you could only get from the white shoe stores. So my mother drew an outline of my feet on a brown paper bag and ordered to get the closest size because we weren't allowed to go inside.
This was just one of the situations that angered Claudette. Her anger was part of the reason she worked to find a solution that would break the barrier that divided the races.
Claudette Colvin joins us here in our studio now, 73 years old, living in the Bronx. President Obama talked about Rosa Parks' singular act, but it wasn't exactly singular because you had done it before, 9 months before. She was 42. You were 15 years old. What gave you the courage that day? You were coming home from school?
Yes. What gave me the courage? All the unfair treatment that I had experienced in my early childhood. One of the questions asked, why didn't you get up when the bus driver asked you and the policeman? I said I could not move because history had me glued to the seat. And they say, how is that? I say, because it felt like soldier on the truth, hands were pushing me down on one shoulder, and Harriet Tubman, hands were pushing me down on another shoulder. And I could not move. And I yelled out, it's my constitutional rights. Because I wasn't breaking the law under the state's law, separate but equal. I was sitting in the area that was reserved for black pensioners. At that time, we didn't even want to be called black because black had a negative connotation. We were called colors. So I was sitting in the colors section. But because of Jim Crow law, the bus driver had police force. He could ask you to get up. And the problem was that the white woman that was standing near me, she wasn't an elderly white woman. She was a young white woman. She had a whole seat to sit down by opposite me in the opposite row, but she refused to sit down because of Jim Crow laws. A white person couldn't sit opposite a colored person. and a white person had to sit in front of you. The purpose was to make white people feel superior and colored people feel inferior.
And this is something you clearly understood at the age of 15.
Oh, sure, because I didn't have to prepare for it. You learn it. I learned it at a very early age.
So the police come March 2nd,
Yes.
1955. You're refusing to get up. When they come on the bus, what do they do to you?
Well, they asked me to get up, and I refused. And one of the policemen was a traffic policeman. He at Court Square, and he yelled to the bus motorman that he had no jurisdiction here, and he got off. So the bus driver moved the bus to Bilbin Commerce, and then 2 squad car policemen come on the bus, and I became more defiant. When they asked me the same question, and they yelled, "Gal, why are you sitting there?" I said, "It's my constitutional right. I pay my fares, it's my constitutional rights." And he said, "Constitutional rights," and then one kicked at me, and he knocked the books out of my hand, out of my lap. And then one grabbed one arm and one grabbed the other, and they manhandled me off the bus. And after I got in the squad car, they handcuffed me through the window and took me to booking, and then not to a juvenile facility, but to an adult jail. And I stayed in jail approximately 3 hours until my pastor, Reverend H.H. Johnson, and my mother came and bailed me out.
Later in that interview with Democracy Now!, Claudette Colvin said,
I remember, in February, people celebrated Negro History Week, but our school did it for a whole month. So I had a whole month to talk about all the injustices. Mrs. Josie Lawrence, my history teacher, she taught us about Africa even when we learned about current events. I began to think about all of this and how unfair we were treated.
Before Claudette was brought to jail, she stated that she was not scared, but when she got there, she said,
I was scared, and it was really, really frightening. It was like those old Western movies when they put the bandit in the jail cell, and you can hear the keys. I can still hear the vivid click of those keys. I waited about 3 hours for my mother to arrive with my pastor to bail me out. My mother knew I was disappointed with the system and all the injustice that we were receiving, and she told me, well, Claudette, we finally did it.
When Claudette went to court, she was charged with disorderly conduct, violating the segregation ordinance, and assault and battery. However, all 3 charges were dropped except for the assault and battery charge. After her trial, Claudette Colvin moved back to her home of Birmingham, Alabama. She later returned to Montgomery to help other black leaders with the Montgomery bus boycott. On December 5, 1955, about 40,000 African Americans avoided taking Montgomery's city buses. Black leaders spread the word by telling African American pastors to announce the bus boycott plans at church. On the afternoon of December 1st, they elected Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as president and head director of the bus boycott. The boycott finally ended on December 20th, 1956. One of the reasons why Claudette was not the face of the boycott was because movement leaders and organizations thought she was too rebellious. Another reason that they didn't support Claudette was that she became pregnant. They did not want to support someone who was unmarried and pregnant at the age of 16. A world of opportunity was open for people of color, just because of one young girl who broke the racial barrier in her community. Without Claudette, Rosa Parks may never have been inspired, people might have never stood up for what was right, and we might still have a large amount of segregation today. As Claudette Colvin once said, I knew then, and I know now, when it comes to justice, there's no easy way to get it.